This is We Admit by ASAP, the podcast where we share true stories from admission and enrollment professionals. I'm your host, Janice Crampton, Executive Director and CEO. So on this episode of We Admit, different than what I usually do in giving my description of the person who's going to be my guest today, and giving them that background and history, I'm just going to say this person that's joining me this week does not need any introduction because we all know and love my guest this week. And that's Debby Murphy, who is our Director of Educational Programming here at ASAP. So once again, as they say in the theater, without further ado, Debby Murphy. Debby Murphy's in the house.
I'm so excited about our conversation and being invited to join the podcast. So I'm a big fan of the podcast.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I hope that you're not just saying that because, on your monthly paycheck, no matter how big or small, my signature's there,
Yeah,
right?
no,
No.
not at all.
Anyway, just a little holiday levity here. So I don't know about you, but woof, it is a busy time of year. Busy time of year. Tell me a little bit again about the seat that you sit in, obviously for our association, but are you feeling, on behalf of the entire profession, are you feeling that this is a busier pace, kind of the same usual crazy pace, or that things are slowing down? What's the word on the street?
Well, because we are finishing one CAPE cohort that began in July, and there were 2 sections of that cohort, and then we launched a new CAPE cohort. So there was this little overlap where I met with 3 different CAPE cohorts within 1 week, maybe 10 days period of time, the last being just yesterday. And I said to them, I always ask them to introduce themselves and to in as part of their introduction to say, what is your priority today or your priority this week? And as they each introduced themselves, I was, floored at how much everyone has on their plates. And I said exactly what you just asked at the end of the introductions in each of these calls. I said, I usually try to share the through line. And I said, the through line from your introductions is that there couldn't possibly be a worse time for a CAPE cohort call. And yet you all showed up. So I said, thank you for showing up. And isn't there some expression about, half the battle is showing up or half the victory is showing up. So yes, I think people are very busy. I think, I don't know if it's the way the holidays fell this year or the timing of Thanksgiving, but I think no matter how you slice it, that time between Thanksgiving and then the December holidays is crazy in schools in general. And then you add, for the admission professionals, that some actually have decision application deadlines in the last couple of weeks, and some actually are, still very much trying to get people to the top of the funnel so they can push them through that funnel as far as visits and applications and so on and so forth. So it's a crazy time of year, and then obviously kind of overlay the personal pieces and family and everything else. And think we have always said that multitasking is a competency, an admission and enrollment competency. And if we haven't, it should be elevated to being the top, because no admission professional at this time of year is focusing or has the luxury of focusing on just one thing.
It's funny though, in the spirit of there's no one in this profession that can focus on one thing. I'm getting ready to ask you, what do you think is the one reason why, despite how busy people are, people continue to, dare I say, show up, make this a priority to not just come to, let's say, a CAPE cohort, but the conversation with colleagues and the affinity groups? I mean, there's got to be a secret sauce here that not only are we creating by virtue of the belonging component, but what do you think people are thirsty for?
I think just that connection to other like-minded professionals and people who speak their language as, yeah, those conversation with colleagues and these CAPE cohort groups, as each person introduces themselves and describes perhaps, what their challenge is that week, you see everyone else shaking their heads like, "Oh, I get that, I get that." Um, and I think that is so valuable, and it doesn't necessarily mean coming together with, 50 or 100 colleagues, but sometimes it's just 5 or 10, and you leave feeling affirmed, and you leave feeling as if you're not going crazy because others are experiencing some of these same challenges and seeing some of these same things. Um, and I think people are tired and in some cases and at some moments overwhelmed, but people are hopeful. People remain hopeful. People remain, excited about the profession, excited about the work they're doing. I think it takes a certain person to be really good and to really, um, kind of manage all that's required of them in this profession these days. But I think it's still I hope people still feel it's a wonderful profession and a wonderful way to still have an impact and, contribute to the school community and, help the school itself, like, deliver on its mission. So I still feel really strongly that, um, there's a lot of people still really excited about the work that we're doing.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I completely agree with you, and I think as we see at ASAP, not only, the increase in the number of people that come to our career center and that are thinking about, how they can get into the profession, but what makes them stay, and, if in fact they do make a change, it's for various reasons, but, what they are looking for in that next step. I love the phrase, and we use it a lot, is there's a common thread throughout, and there is this notion of connectivity. One of the things that I continue to hear more of and see more evidence of, and I'm just curious to see if you're hearing this as well. But the number of people whose offices are still remote, or in fact they're hybrid. That idea notion of I'm in admission and yet I might work from, my home office. Are you finding that to be an ever increasing trend, or, again, what's your sense on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question right now, and I am not, I mean, certainly the people with whom I meet, I'm seeing them in their offices. So I do feel as if, as far as the visits with families and the interaction with faculty and all of that, that it's really important that the admission and enrollment professionals continue to have credibility within the community by being present and in the community. On the other hand, I do know of some offices, particularly in a boarding school type setting, where they have hired people to do virtual Zoom meetings and interviews, and that person could be located, if your school's located in Virginia, that staff person could be located in Los Angeles. So I do think that there's been some good kind of leaning into what worked, really well during COVID and what may have proven to be more efficient during COVID. But I'm curious to, yeah, I think that's a good poll question. I'm curious to continue to see how that goes, as far as people being permitted, if it's a case of asking permission to work from home, um, and how that will play out, as we even, continue into the next year, so.
Yeah. Well, I think certainly, back in the day, here I go reminiscing, but back in the day during the sort of reading period, right? When we had those true physical manila folders, you'd sign out your box of folders and you would celebrate the time that your office allowed you to, oh golly, should I even say this out loud? But walk across the campus and go to your own house and sit there and read rather than being physically in the space. But now through the wonders of technology and software tools and all that, it's again, it's in a system. I was talking with a school the other day who, in fact, is located physically in Florida. And they have a staff person whose family moved, the husband, partner, spouse, had an employment opportunity in Ohio, and she still is part of their school experience. She manages all the visits. She takes care of all of the scheduling. She can do that from Ohio. She doesn't need to be in Florida. But it's like this idea of, wait a minute, so gone are the days of, which is kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah, I think that's a huge upside of something that we learned from COVID and something that, perhaps there were heads or even directors who were very hesitant and stringent about not letting their staff work from home or not allowing people to be outside the office. Um, and as we all know, there was lots of good work that took place during COVID. And I get it. I would be conflicted if I were, running a huge school or a huge team, and you had a lot of your administrators the teachers don't have that option. So is it like an equity thing and a fairness thing? And, can chunks of people work from home? So I get that there's a lot of complicated questions about it, but I still think it's one of the really good things that came out of COVID. So
It's also the not just the flexibility of what your choices are, but it really did push people to think differently, which again, yay, right? Because gone are the days of that traditional way of doing it. Although maybe it's the holidays, I'm kind of stuck on tradition.
looking
Again,
back.
like, can't we just but the other thing I think speaks to the pace is the increase in the number of schools that are providing, again, that sort of higher education model of early action and early
Mm.
decision. What are some of the things that, again, I'm asking you to represent an entire profession, but given the role that you play for our association, I think you have the privilege and you should be respected for your ability to make these broad stroke generalizations. But are you finding that schools are turning to early action and early decision predicated on the need to, let's say, more proactively get to a share of the market? Or is it predicated on, just again, a pace? Or do you have a sense of what's driving people towards this?
I do think schools are really respectful of any kind of regional associations that they may be part of, and that many of these regional groups have rules that they've agreed upon in terms of, when they will release decisions and when they will require decisions. So I do think that the conversation is taking place and it is happening for some schools, but that schools are trying to be collegial and collaborative and keep the kids at the forefront of these decisions. Like, is this the right thing for kids? And then I do think there's schools that don't have necessarily other independent schools in their area, and they are able to really, start admitting kids and filling the school, and it's much more of a rolling admissions process where they may offer some admission in December and have kids start to enroll at that time. And for those schools, in many cases, they are schools that are going to be admitting all year, and all through the spring and summer. And they are do yes, as you mentioned, they're doing it in order to get a grasp of their enrollment numbers and their budget and how the operating budget will kind of, unfold as far as the following spring. So I think I think it is an individual decision, and if it's right for that school and those kids. I do know many schools where it's the student making the decision and not the parents making the decision, so not a five-year-old, but a 7th grader or an 8th grader. For many of those schools, they feel like, you know, having watched the college scene and the early admission scene get pretty 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 out of control. They feel like the kids would be really young to be making those decisions in, like, November or December, and that kids, as we know, when they're 13 and 14 years old, 6 months can be a lot of time. So to have kids get admitted and then have to make a decision, in the fall of their 8th grade year versus the spring of their 8th grade year, that's a big change as far as
Yeah,
as
yeah.
that process, yeah.
Well, and let us not forget that as we represent and work with that pre-K through PG space, that whoever the decision maker is, whether it is little Johnny or little Susie, insert those names, and whatever age and stage you're at, that it may be that parent that's making the decision, and let alone, 6 months makes a huge decision in the life of a parent.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think what you're also identifying here is perhaps what I might call a cautionary tale, that for as much as early, 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 not only from a calendar standpoint, but a timing standpoint, has real merit, there are other things that come into play that have to be considered on the part of us as practitioners and as educators, that sometimes early isn't necessarily the best. But also, again, as you're mentioning, the various consortiums that are out there and whatever, there's a real need for us to go back to a document that was created by ASAP in 2012, that is the ethical behavior and best practices for those in admission and enrollment, so that we aren't breaching any antitrust or collusion. And again, this idea notion of our schools are choice, right? So beautifully, again, needing to be reminded of, and that if we stop in our process this opportunity for people to make choice, that's not good. That is, again, a problem here. Have you ever wondered how you stack up? I mean, truly stack up between where you are in your career, your salary, your office size, maybe even how you stack up as a school in the context of other schools that are like yours? Well, ASAP has a way to solve that problem. It's through our Pathways Benchmarking Salary and Survey tool. We hope that you've participated because it certainly is part of your membership. But if you haven't finished this survey, there's still time. So make sure to hunt out that email that we sent to you. Or if you didn't get that email, reach out to us at info@asap.org, and we'll make sure that you have the tools in order for you to know your pathway, know your journey. So, Debbie, as you think about, kind of continuing in our conversation around what you're seeing and hearing here, um, the use of artificial intelligence and chat GPT is something that you and your role are going to have us focus, not just a little bit, but a lot of it. That's even grammatically correct, at our upcoming annual institute this June in Salt Lake City. A little bit of a PR shout out, but also in the Enrollment Marketing Summit and several other places and venues. For as much as we can certainly have our listeners turn to the resources where they can find more information, I'd love your thoughts on this as it relates to, again, a phrase that you've used before, but another resource or tool for us to learn more about the student and the family and its relationship to joining the community. Um, it sounds as though you and many others are saying lean into it rather than turn away from AI and ChatGPT. Can you say a little bit more about why people are feeling that way in a world where everybody's so skeptical?
Yeah, I think it's scary, and I think there's the whole piece of, using a tool and a bot, a robot to, do anything when it comes to, you know, dealing with families and people and students and children and human beings feels really not only unethical, but just scary. And so I think, um, as I've learned more about it and seen people demonstrate it, particularly in that marketing space with creating messages and utilizing ChatGPT as more of that personal assistant intern type thing. We all know it's easier to like edit than to start with a blank piece of paper. So it's almost using it for that first draft, but making sure that someone goes in and looks at, and that there's no automation that goes right from the draft to a communication to families or anything like that. Because that's the part where I think I think we will lose the really personal human touch of admissions and enrollment work that we know is so critical to, to the work that we do and to the kids. I mean, really, in terms of kids and parents and families. So I think there's lots of good in it, and I mostly encourage people to lean into it as far as a new technology and something, similar to honing or strengthening your data and spreadsheeting skills, because using data to drive strategy is a really important component of admission and enrollment work that not everyone, I think, has fully embraced yet. So I think it's similar. It kind of falls into that category, and I certainly don't wanna make an ageist comment, because I know there's people who are probably, you know, been in the career for 30 and 40 years who are doing amazing things with AI and data and research, but I do feel like the younger generation and those new to the career and new to the field have such comfort and natural abilities in these areas that it would be a shame not to tap into their natural. These are the digital natives. I mean, these are the ones who grew up, with a cell phone in their hand. So not to tap into their natural abilities and curiosity and have them as members of your office, um, taking some risks and trying some new things in this areas would be a shame, because I think a lot
Yeah.
that can be done there, so
Well, I think the other part that you're also pointing out here, which is such a good one, is it's not the only tool, it's one of the many tools. And I think sometimes, we even find in our delivering of educational content this idea and notion that, you want to have a discussion and you want people to be able to listen and think and, respond to. And they're like, is this going to be, could I have the PowerPoint? It's like, well, how about if you just think of it as like not just the conversation that you're going to type in and then there's your
yeah.
answer, but sometimes it's that springboard for your own personalization of ideas in Notion. It's a way to, just think of it not as the end, but as the
I
start,
love that,
right?
Janice. I completely agree with you, and, um, again, I think that gets back to a little bit of the fatigue and overwhelmed and, um sort of the checklist that people are pressed and trying to check things off, and I love the way you just stated it, to not see it as the solution and the end, but more of a launching point, for some great new stuff, that could lie ahead. So
Yeah, it does cause us to also think about the interesting domino effect because just a few moments ago we were talking about, an office that may be remote or, on the campus. There's good and bad and a domino effect. Then we think about, okay, so Chat GPT and the disconnect that you might find between the student that you just met with on an interview or let's say the submission of the recent English paper doesn't sound a lot like the essay that you got, but it's if we truly go back to what I hope we never lose in this profession is that we're part detective, in a positive way, right? We're looking for reasons to include, not reason to exclude. As you put these pieces of the puzzle together, wow, this is one of the pieces. And if you are going to rely heavily on, let's say, an essay or a writing submission, be aware that you may find an increased need for more people on Zoom to do interviews. because you need to see a person on campus. So it really is, kind of fascinating here. Boy, we've talked about a lot of different things in our time together today, and I will say, not only when we are on a platform such as this, am I reminded of how much of an honor and a privilege it is to be able to work with you on the daily, but also, again, as we think about the various ideas and initiatives that we're putting forward on behalf of our profession, we're going to lighten it up a little bit here. Okay, so in the spirit of the fact that yes, someone could be listening to this recording and it's in June. We are recording this and it is in the throes of the holiday season. So that's my way of saying, ding, 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 sprinkle a little, snow and festivity in this. Debbie, as you think back on the year that is drawing to a close, what are you proudest of? Not only personally, but let's all say professionally too, because you've done a lot.
Wow. Well, I think I'll start with the personal because I think that's,
Yeah.
a little more tip of tongue. And, I hope we all take pride in our families and our children and certainly not to take this away from the men at all listening to this, but certainly as a woman and as a mother, my children and not to say too much about them because I'm sure, God forbid, this podcast pop up on one of their feeds and they hear themselves mentioned. Um, but
Oh, that's so
they,
funny. Yeah.
the ages of my children are 20 and or 19, 22, and 25, and they have all um, kind of started new adventures this year. So I'm proud to see them doing their thing. My good friend and colleague, Jane Freed, um, who I had the pleasure of working with in the Andover admission office for many years, and who's now the head of school at the Brearley School in New York City. I had all my babies while I was in the Andover admission office, and she had her children, but she was 6 or 7 years ahead of me. And she used to say when I would come in looking really blurry eyed after, one of the babies was up or something, and she would say, listen, she, little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. And Janice, I know you and I laugh about this all the time, but when your 2-year-old wakes you up at 2 o'clock in the morning, um, you kind of pat them on the back or maybe feed them and send them back to bed. But when your 22-year-old wakes you up at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's usually a little bit different. So I am
Woo.
proud and grateful
Yeah.
for my children and the various adventures that they are undergoing and taking on. And, professionally, I'm really proud of ASAP for the growth in this past year, for really the incredible just programming and partnerships that have taken place with all sorts of wonderful practitioners who've done webinars for us and presented at the annual institute and the financial aid summit and the data to drive strategy summit, and now our upcoming marketing enrollment summit. So just I think um, we are responding to the needs of the profession, and we are fairly flexible and able to um, really fill a need in pretty short time, because as we all know, all sorts of new challenges are coming along at all points in time.
So Debbie, as you're talking about these different things that we're proud and excited about, I think what I also know for sure, not only working with you, but also on behalf of the association, I think we're also willing to take some risks, and maybe be comfortable in our own skin. That oftentimes is a little different than other things out there. I mean, again, thoughts and reactions to that, agreement or disagreement. By the way, listeners, Debbie and I don't always agree, and that's the beauty of having a really great working relationship, because I think both of us say, but what about? So anyway, that was a quick aside. But again, are you seeing more opportunity or clarity as to who we are? And how does that necessarily demonstrate itself in the world of ASAP?
Yeah, I think there's, I continue, I believed this from the earliest days of my working at ASAP to now, that people are hungry for um, learning and training and others to talk with, and that it truly can be, a lonely job, particularly in schools where you might be the office of one. So I think there's this real need and real excitement about some of the, not only just pure content we're putting forward, but also the manner in which we're doing it, some of the creative ways in which we're bringing people together, whether it's online or through these cohort groups or, at our in-person events. So I feel really proud of how much the association has really taken on and not only dreamed of, but actually implemented and kind of carried through on, um, over the last. I mean, it's always funny looking back at the end of the year because, last January was, a long time ago, and even though we operate, with schools, and so we sometimes see ourselves on that, like, September to June calendar, but of course, we're on a fiscal year, but then when you think about the calendar year and what's taken place in the last 11 months, um, there's been a lot. There's been a lot of good stuff, yeah.
And isn't it funny too that again, I'm just always reminded of the world around us is saying Happy New Year. And I'm like, what do you mean? We're in the middle of it. Because I always think that the start of school is the start of the new year. And I guess I kind of get all giddy over getting my new notebook and my first day of school outfit. But anyway, that's the cloth that I am cut from. I once again want to say, in the spirit of we admit and where we are in the calendar, not necessarily in our cycle, that you are a present that is under my holiday tree. And working with you continues to be. I know if this was a visual, she's rubbing her eyes. Wah, wah. But no, this should be a warning on the podcast. Now Janice is getting really sappy. Oh, I know what we got to do. Since this isn't our usual We Admit podcast, and because you've been on our podcast before, I've asked you the question of what's your Get Psych song. But now I'm going to ask you, Debbie, what's your favorite holiday song?
All I want for Christmas is you.
I
Dun,
know, a
dun,
little
dun,
Mariah
dun, na,
Carey.
na, 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 na,
Yeah.
na.
There is just one thing I need. I play that every time the kids walk in the door. Not every time.
I'm with
The
you.
first time they walk in the door at Christmas. Do you play that?
I do. We send it around on our family text.
I love
We
it. Oh
laugh
my God,
about
I
it.
love it.
So yeah,
Oh,
yeah. Yeah, and my daughter Maddie, who recently moved to Annapolis and teaches at the Severn
yeah.
School, um, texted us recently and sent the Mariah Carey song on we call it the Fab Five text, the Fab Five,
Yeah.
because she is going in Baltimore. Mariah Carey's coming on December 15th, and Maddie got tickets to her Christmas concert. So I
No.
think this might come out after December 15th, but we should be putting a little blurb, a little video of Maddie holding it up as Mariah Carey is singing that song in concert.
I think we
Yeah.
must. I think we
Yeah.
must. Yeah,
Coming
this'll
live.
definitely, yeah, come in
Yeah.
live. Well, all I want for Christmas, baby, is you. Thank you
Oh,
again
thank
for
you,
joining
Janice.
me,
So good
and
to be here.
I look forward to future
Me
conversations.
too.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of We Admit. To learn more about the Association of Independent School Admission Professionals and how you can take advantage of membership benefits, visit asap.org. That's AISAP.org.